Look out, Internet. This is the best screenwriting book ever written. This is the book where, if I could go back in time and change history, I would give myself this book when I was in high school. Which book, you may ask? It is called Anatomy of Story by John Truby. Some big claims. By the end of this review, you'll know the strengths and weaknesses of John Truby's famous screenwriting book and where you can get a copy if you don't already have it. I don't even have an official copy of the book. I have an unofficial, janky copy. But this just shows you how much this book means to me. Alright? This is my copy of Anatomy of Story. It was given to me by one of my professors in grad school, the editing teacher no less, and she just sent everybody a PDF of the book. Because she was going to use it in class and we were going to look over part of it and she was going to talk about it. And I didn't understand the stuff. Really didn't. But then later, when I got done with my graduate program, I took the time to read through it. I went ahead and printed everything off and bound it myself. It's like, let me read this textbook that my teacher gave me. And it blew my mind. It really blew my mind. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, John Truby, he's not really like the screenwriter that we know about. He's not somebody that's well known. He's just another one of these story gurus. And I can see why you'd say that, you know. But for somebody like me who's very theoretical, this book was extremely helpful in that it tackles screenwriting and especially story creation outlining from an organic perspective. Let me explain more about what I mean about it being more organic. So, Anatomy of Story kind of takes this idea of storytelling as strategy and makes it accessible to a storyteller like I used to be, who was fumbling in the dark. You know, I know a lot of these concepts and I've actually written a lot of these scripts, but it still feels like paint by numbers. It feels like I'm just trying to fill in the blanks, almost like Mad Libs, and I don't really understand the mechanics of how stories work, especially how they're supposed to work. And this, because it approaches things kind of by reverse engineering them, it really, really helped me understand things in a way that I think you kind of have to understand story if you want to be able to come up with your stories in a new and creative way. One of the reasons why I think the book is also really good is because, as I was saying, when he breaks down things and reverse engineers them, he also starts kind of from the ending. Truby likes to take this concept of not just the story premise or what we would call a log line, but also the designing principle. So it's like, what does the storyteller want to achieve with this story? Here's some examples, all right? So the story of the Exodus in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, premise, so the log line could kind of be when an Egyptian prince discovers that he is a Hebrew, he leads his people out of slavery. I would quibble with that and say God leads his people out of slavery using Moses. But the designing principle is a man who does not know who he is struggles to lead his people to freedom and receives the new moral laws that will define him and his people. So you could kind of say that while the story idea is about this person who does this thing in order to achieve this goal, the designing principle is, as a storyteller, I want to use this story in order to achieve this end. Not necessarily in a propagandistic way. It's not like propaganda, but as kind of, this is the emotional outcome that I want to achieve for It's a Wonderful Life. The premise or the log line could be described as, when a man prepares to commit suicide, an angel shows him what the world would be like if he'd never been born. Okay, that's the premise, but the designing principle is to express the power of the individual by showing what a town and a nation would be like if one man had never lived. So by looking at how you contrast not just the concept that you have, but also what you want to achieve with that concept, it makes the story outlining process so much more clear. And it's actually reminiscent of the advice that Edgar Allan Poe gives on creating stories and trying to know the ending first before you even start. And Edgar Allan Poe said this in 1846. Nothing is more clear than that every plot worthy of the name must be elaborated to its denouement, or its ending, before anything can be attempted with the pen. It is only with the denouement constantly in view that we can give a plot its indispensable air of consequence or causation by making the incidents, and especially the tone of all points, tend to the development of the intention. And so having this designing principle, as Truby calls it, kind of helps you with that intention towards tone and causation and denouement that Poe is talking about. So once I figured out what the designing principle actually meant and how to use it, it made the whole outlining process and story conceptualization process like at a whole nother level. Okay. Next thing that I love about Truby's book is that the characters are supposed to be like real people. They're not supposed to be caricatures. They're not just like, oh, I'm gonna like think of a stereotype and change their name and then bam, there's gonna be my main character. It's like, no, think of it like they actually are a person. They have a weakness or several weaknesses. They have a need that stems from that weakness. They have psychological need and a moral need, and they have to have their character arc is composed of that moral change that they choose to make or choose to not make if it's a cautionary tale. So like thinking of them as fully orbed people really helped me realize the power of a story in order to make it like this vehicle for emotion, this vehicle for deeper meaning. Because if you just have a caricature, if you just have a stereotype, or the type of character that you've just seen 100 times already, audience is not going to care about them. If you don't care about the character, why would the audience, you know? So this paradigm shift really helped me become a lot more character focused. Another thing that Truby really expounds upon, which was kind of eye-opening for me, was his approach to world building. Now he doesn't call it world building, that's kind of using my term for it, but he kind of uses this concept of the story world and how the story that you create for your characters to inhabit should mirror their journeys. All right, so you can kind of think about, as an example of Star Wars Episode 4, Luke starts out in this desert planet, and that mirrors, it's like an externalization of his emotional situation. Like he doesn't really have much of a family, he doesn't really seem like he has much of a future. His future seems barren and hopeless, kind of like how he feels. While it doesn't have to be that obvious, there are so many other ways that you can make the surroundings of your character and the settings in which you find the different characters and how they come together and collide to help move the story forward in kind of a symbolic way. And that was really eye-opening for me too. Speaking of symbols, another thing that I really like about Truby's approach is that he focuses on symbols not just as objects that hold meaning, but as a motif of things that grow in meaning. A lot of you, if you've studied screenwriting, know about the concept of the MacGuffin, right? It's the object that a lot of characters are going after, and so they're fighting over this object which represents some kind of theme in the story, and so it is a symbol. So think about the Maltese Falcon. In the movie, the Maltese Falcon. All the people are after the Falcon, and then it's like, you know, kind of this, we build this expectation for this object, and we finally see the object, and there you go. Speaking of the Maltese Falcon, if you want to see how I reverse engineered the Maltese Falcon, then click right up here and you can watch that. It's really cool. So that is an example of a MacGuffin, which technically is a type of symbol. But what Truby does, by breaking it down into a symbol web, is that he takes this concept of a symbol and has it build upon itself, so that you have iterations of a symbol, so that you have motifs of symbols, so that the symbol's meaning and narrative weight repeats and also changes meaning and changes in its depth of meaning as well. So to contrast kind of the MacGuffin concept, we can use the story web concept by looking once again at Star Wars. You've got in Empire Strikes Back, his dad cuts his hand off, and then he has to get a robotic hand. And then the next film, we see he wears the glove. He's got the one, you know, the dark glove, and then the bare hand, really emphasizing that he's different. Even though he wouldn't have to wear the glove, because we saw in the previous film, it looked like a normal hand, but he wears a glove anyway. So we take that symbol and we're adding meaning to it, because it's this visual reminder that he's different and that something has happened to him. He has this trauma. And then later in the final duel with Darth Vader, he cuts Darth Vader's hand off, revealing that Darth Vader, his father, also has a robotic hand. So that is an example of this repetition of a symbol. You've got a robotic hand, and then covering the robotic hand that doesn't need to be covered because it means something to the character, doing the same thing that was done to that character does to the other character in reverse, and then finally revealing that they both have robotic hands to show the similarities between the father and the son, and how the son doesn't want to become the father, but he already kind of is. That is an example of a symbol web that increases the meaning of the symbol by reusing it and adding layers of meaning upon it. And once I learned how that works, it was kind of like, oh, there's so many other things in movies that I hadn't seen before, and now I'm gonna have to go look and find them and find all these other symbol webs and make sure that I can creatively put them in my film. And so those are the reasons why I really, really value this book, and why, if I could go back in time, I would give myself this book. You know, I know it looks so janky for me to have this printed off copy from school, and it's got all these highlights in it, but it kind of reminds me how important the book is to me. And it's like, even though it is chewed up and janky and homemade, very rednecky. I'm allowed to say that because I'm from the South. It's such a formative book in kind of my own journey as a screenwriter. That's why I am so glad that I have it, and why I really think you should get it too. So, if you want to get a copy of Anatomy of Story, then I've got a link down in the description, and you can get it on bookshop.org. Now, why do I recommend bookshop.org specifically? Well, I am an affiliate with them, so you can support the channel here by getting the book through that link, and it doesn't cost you any extra. But also, Bookshop is different than places like Amazon or Barnes & Noble because Bookshop supports local independent bookstores, and they actually donate part of their proceeds to these local bookstores to keep them open. And if there's a particular bookstore in your area that you want to support, you can type it in on their map and support that bookstore, and they get all of the proceeds. So to get Anatomy of Story on bookshop.org, click the link down below in the description and support independent bookstores. And after you've done that, you can click up here and watch this video about the screenwriting book that I don't like at all. Okay, I like it a little bit, but I mostly don't like it. So if you want to figure out why I kind of hate it, basically hate it, but not quite, then you should click. Yeah, you should click. Did you click? Okay.